Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In for September 9th, 2020. Today's topic, we are going to be talking about WebAssembly and how it is driving some thinking that I'm having around the divide in DevOps and the way that it's changing the technical landscape. Now, funny story. I already did this video once, and then I discovered that there was no audio. And I'm not sure if it's because I did a Windows update or if it's because I reinstalled Voice Meter because I needed to, but apparently all of my audio inputs were scrambled. So this is a do-over for me, but it's a first time for you, hopefully. I think one or two people tuned into the original live stream, and no one seemed to mention that they couldn't hear me at all. That would have been useful information back then. But anyway, all that aside, we are going to talk about WASM and we're going to talk about the DevOps divide a little bit today. Before we do that, housekeeping item, the one thing that I have, this is episode 111. How about that? 111 episodes, and I just like the number, so I thought I would call it out there. I don't need to celebrate the number of episodes or anything, just 111. It's a fun number. And before we get into the topic today, I just want to check in with you. How you doing? What's going on? How's your Wednesday? Does it feel like a Tuesday? If you're in the US, it probably feels a little bit like a Tuesday because, Labor Day and all that. It does feel a bit like a Tuesday to me. Like I should be eating tacos or something, but I'm not. So it's not a Tuesday. It's a Wednesday. That's okay. That's okay. It means we're one step closer to the end of the week, which is nice. I don't know if this has been a stressful week for you, but I got to imagine if you have kids and they went back to school this week, oh boy, that is it's a big change. I know we were sort of doing virtual in last school year, but this time the school districts have had time to prepare, which means they've also had time to make it more complicated. So my kids are struggling with the technology and figuring out how to do all the things. And they're also doing it at their old daycare, which is kind of weird for my older one because he's like, God, I'm back at daycare. I thought I was gone from here, but no, unfortunately, that's just the circumstances that we find ourselves in today. So I hope you're doing okay. Hope the week isn't too stressful for you. Let's talk about WebAssembly and the DevOps divide. Now, I've been thinking about this a bit lately because of two things. The first of those two things is when I look at my Twitter feed, I see a lot more from people that are in the development space than I do people that are in the infrastructure and ops space. And I don't know if that's because ops people are just more curmudgeonly and they don't want to share on Twitter, or if it's just that developers have a lot more to say, or they're just like adopting that platform a lot more. Maybe I'm just on the wrong platform for ops folks, but it does seem to be there's a bit of a divide there. So I'm wondering why that is and why there is still so much of a divide, considering how the ops and dev roles have started merging a little bit. And there's even a movement called DevOps. How about that? But DevOps it's a culture and it's a practice and it's something that draws on the expertise that you build as a developer and the expertise that you have to build as an infrastructure person. And infrastructure people have a lot of knowledge to share because while developers, they traditionally were very focused on their application code and they might talk to the ops folks a little bit, but really once the application was ready to be deployed, then it became the infrastructure person's problem. And they were responsible for standing up and maintaining the network, standing up and maintaining the virtualization environment and the virtual machines and the hardware hosts and setting up storage arrays. Like ops had to do a lot of stuff. And then, there became what happened was the cloud happened. And suddenly developers were let loose on infrastructure because now all the infrastructure was code driven. I mean, it was always code driven, but now there were exposed APIs that developers could get their hooks into to build not only the infrastructure, but also build the application. And because of that, they started making the same mistakes that infrastructure people had learned from 10 years ago. And so I think DevOps became even more important at that point because you needed the infrastructure person who has all this background in infrastructure, letting the application developer know, you probably shouldn't do that. And here's why. And here's a better way of doing it with infrastructure. Okay, that all makes sense. So we're all learning, we're all growing together, and there's been this bleed over. This is compounded, I think, because as I look a little bit deeper at what's coming down the pike, what are the new technologies that I'm seeing? One of them is called WebAssembly, and it's something that I've been learning about on my job. One of my jobs, I say I have a lot of jobs, writing docs for a startup. They're really interested in WebAssembly and how it can fit into Kubernetes and service meshes. Now, I threw a lot of words out there. So Kubernetes, you hopefully know what that is. A service mesh is a way to control the access and expose and connect different services within a Kubernetes cluster. So you can expose a service through the service mesh, you can apply policies, and you can have a proxy that's interpreting requests and maybe even generating the MTLS connection between 2 points. And I talked a lot about service meshes in in one of last week's episodes. So maybe I'll throw a card up there to a link to that if you want to know more about service meshes. The thing that drives those service meshes, the most popular one, is called Envoy. And so Envoy is usually set up as a sidecar container within a Kubernetes pod. So you've got your main application running in one container, and then all the network traffic that's going out and in is being intercepted by this proxy. And that proxy is doing something to the traffic. It's transmogrifying it in some way. And Envoy does that through a chain of filters. So it has a bunch of different filters, and each one can do different things to the packet that's intercepted. And it can do it at the layer 4 TCP layer, or it could do it at the layer 7 HTTP layer. So it can kind of work at either one. So it has this processing stack that it goes through, and it has a bunch of built-in filters. Now, what if you wanted to extend that? What if you wanted to add your own custom filters for custom traffic processing? That was traditionally somewhat difficult to do. You had to recompile Envoy from source, adding in your additional filters. So to make it more pluggable, version 1.5 of Istio and Envoy added this filter that was WebAssembly. Okay, now we've gotten to WebAssembly. What is WebAssembly? Excuse me. WebAssembly was created mostly around browsers because the predominant language that a lot of browsers use is JavaScript to get stuff done on the server side and the client side. And JavaScript is okay, but it's not terribly efficient. It was never meant to do all these things that people are asking it to do now. So what if we could use some lower level languages that run at a better or a faster pace than JavaScript? That's where WebAssembly comes in. It uses a virtual machine, a tiny virtual machine that's sandboxed from everything else to run compiled code, basically. And it's close to assembly code. It's so close, they decided to call it WebAssembly. The actual code can be written in Go, or it can be written in C++, or a bunch of other options, but it does allow a lot of powerful things to happen inside the context of a browser. And you can do that with these very powerful lower level languages. Okay, that sounds pretty cool. How does this have to do with Envoy? Well, somebody got the idea. Well, I have this really extensible thing that can do a lot of web stuff in the web browser. What if I use that to build filters for Envoy? And thus, WASM was integrated into Envoy in the shape of modules. So you can have a module for WASM, and that module can be inserted into the filter chain for Envoy and do something. And the something can be just about anything because that's the power of using WASM with Envoy. Okay, so that's a lot of background, but what does all this have to do with DevOps? So it's a great question. The answer to it is there's this blurring happening. We've got developers making these really advanced tools that I had to spend a couple hours yesterday researching and reading about to even understand. And then those tools are going to get deployed in production. And you know who's going to be responsible for debugging and monitoring and patching and just generally handling the production operations of that thing? It's going to be ops folks. And ops folks need to stay skilled up on these new technologies as they come out. And to a certain degree, the divide between where dev ends and infrastructure and ops begins has been bleeding over for a while, and it's just accelerating. So, with all that in mind, I think if you are an ops person out there and you are looking to get in on the cutting edge and you want to, you know, increase your value to a company and get on one of these cool DevOps kinds of teams, you have the experience of infrastructure, and that is super important. And you need to bring that experience along with the updated technologies and mesh it with the developers out there that are trying to figure all this stuff out so that you are able to effectively support these solutions when they go out the door. I know it's sort of the whole idea behind a DevOps team is that you're responsible for writing the code, you're responsible for deploying it, and then you're responsible for maintaining it after it comes out. And you, as an ops person, are an integral part of that. And you need to understand these technologies the developers are adapting in order to stay relevant in this job economy. Now, I wouldn't freak out about this right away. You still have plenty of time because this is like cutting edge stuff. Barely any companies are going to be running this in a year, but there's going to be an explosion at some point. I've been assured several times that WASM is going to be a big thing. So if you haven't already gotten on the Kubernetes train and the service mesh train, I would get on that train and keep your eye on this technology. But just as an ops person, and I'm speaking to all the ops and infra people out there, you need to update your skills and stay relevant. Otherwise, you're going to be relegated to just patching that one system while everybody else gets to have the fun. So that's all I have for today. Tomorrow is Thursday, so it's Thursdays on the Edge. We're going to be doing part 2 of building my Raspberry Pi K3S cluster, so don't miss that. And hopefully my audio processed properly this time, because I do not want to do this a third time. Until tomorrow, stay healthy and stay safe, everybody. Thanks.